Okay, looks like we're live. Good morning, readers. Today on my blog, you will find a discussion of a new mystery genre called the Brozy. Now, you might be familiar with cozy series, not necessarily series, with cozy mysteries. And this is a genre I've been writing in for a couple of years. Usually a female protagonist, amateur sleuth, somebody like your Jessica Fletcher or Miss Marple that happens to stumble across bodies or other mysteries and then has a hand in solving them. They're clean, no gore, no sex on the page, that kind of thing. A lighter, enjoyable read, and often are focused around pets, hobbies, bookstores, things like that, sort of a hallmark mystery. So those can tend to be very female-centric, lots of women followers in those series in that genre. And we're trying to expand the genre a little. So a Brozy is a broader cozy, a cozy mystery with a broader appeal, more male readers. So it may be centered around a male protagonist, might be a little bit more adventure or edginess to it, but still looking at a clean mystery, no gore, no sex on the page, something that still is a light, enjoyable read, but maybe less hobby focused for those who are looking for something a bit broader, that are not looking for the cat or muffin trope, if you will. All right, so I've got several of my books that would fall into that genre up on my blog post today, and there's a link in the website, a link in the comment section to my website, and there's also some books by other authors that you may be interested in. Take a look through those and see if you want to pick up one of them. One of the standalone mysteries that I mentioned in my blog post that I haven't done a lot of promotion on lately is In the Tick of Time. And I thought that I would do a brief reading from that today just to give you a little taste about the protagonist, Matt, who's an investigator into vector-borne diseases, and our antagonist, Dwayne. So I'm just going to give you a short reading from that today. Matt, wake up. Are you okay, Matt? Matt pried his eyes open. His head whirled in confusion. He pressed his hands over his eyes, trying to block out the bright light slicing into his brain like a knife. Ow! Oh! What happened? He felt the back of his head. He'd been hit. He remembered he'd been hit during an investigation. He'd been talking to one of the infected men lying in a hospital bed, and the other man must have gotten up behind him. Matt remembered the crushing blows, crashing into the dingy tiled floor in a heap. There was yelling and noise and chaos around him. But it was quiet now. They must have transferred him to the hospital. He'd been all stitched up and bandaged, loaded up with painkillers, and he was in recovery now, waiting to go home. Except he was pretty sure there were no painkillers, not the way the white light hurt his head. There was no bandage on his head as he explored his short brown hair with careful fingers. I was hit, he mumbled. I know where I am. I'm okay. Matt, the voice insisted again, still shaking him. The movement nauseated him. They should be more gentle. He'd just been assaulted. Wake up, Matt. I was hit, he repeated. Yes, you were. But that was weeks ago. The words didn't make any sense to him. Weeks ago? What was weeks ago? Matt scrubbed at his eyes, trying to clear his blurred vision to look around the hospital. What was he doing in a hospital if it wasn't because of the assault? He must have a concussion. That's why he was so disoriented. Matt, you need to wake up. Mavis is coming around, and if she finds you asleep again... What? Blinking and rubbing his eyes some more, Matt pulled his head up and sat up straight, or mostly straight. He canted to one side and had to steady himself with his hands. There was a pool of saliva on his desk where his head had been lying. There were papers on the floor. There was a long series of M's across the computer screen, rapping for several lines. He was at work. Matt cleared his throat, frowning and looking around. "You okay, man?" Jared asked. Jared was boyish and slim. His eyes protruded slightly, making him always look a little surprised and uncertain. He let go of Matt's shoulder slowly, making sure Matt was going to stay upright. "Yeah." Matt rubbed the back of his head slowly. He could still feel the shorter hair where they had shaved him, but the wound and the stitches were long gone. There was a little knot of tissue that was tender if he rubbed it too hard. He could feel a sort of seam where they'd repaired the skull fracture. I guess I fell asleep." Jared nodded. Again. He straightened his light brown uniform shirt, which all the lab techs wore. Again? How many times had he fallen asleep at work over the past few weeks? It was all a little foggy. Matt could feel it coming back if he thought about it hard enough. It was getting sharper the longer he focused on it. He plucked a tissue out of the box on his desk to mop up the spittle and wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. "I guess I just stayed up a bit late last night. I'm fine." "Mavis would really give you hell." "Yeah." Matt rubbed the bridge of his nose with both index fingers. He slid his hands down his face, making sure everything was still in place. The assault had been so sudden and violent, everything felt knocked out of place. Nothing had been the same since. But when he looked in the mirror, he still looked the same, as if he was still the same person he had been before being hit. Matt Malloy, investigator for the Department of Public Health and Environment. "Coffee," Carol suggested with a smile, putting a large mug in front of Matt. "You'd better get down as much as you can." "Thanks." She lingered there for a moment as if she expected more. Her long, dark, blonde hair curled in spirals down her shoulders. She was allowed to wear it loose because she worked on a computer like Matt, not at a lab bench, where it would be a potential contaminant. Matt's brain was still stuttering, still trying to warm up like a car engine on a cold morning. He didn't know what else he should say to her. Carol walked away. Matt picked up the cup and had a drink, willing the coffee to do its job and bring him back to life. "What time is it?" Matt tried to squint at the corner of his screen, where the system clock ticked the minutes away, but it was too small or too far away, and he couldn't sort out the shapes. "It's 2:00, Jared said, looking at his phone. "That's quite the postprandial crash. What exactly did you drink with your lunch?" Matt rubbed one eye at a time, juggling the coffee cup and taking a couple more sips. "Haven't been drinking." He was pretty sure he hadn't been drinking. He would know if he'd been drinking. He was just so tired. "What day is it? How long ago—" Matt chewed on the inside of his cheek. "How long ago was I hit?" The wound was healed. He was back at work. It was long in the past. "That was May," Jared said, enunciating the words like Matt was hard of hearing. "It's the end of June now." "Right." Matt looked at his desk calendar. "It's June." He ventured a smile. "Just testing you." Jared walked away without any change of expression. He didn't roll his eyes or shake his head or grin at the joke, just walked back to his lab bench and sat down to continue with his work. Matt groaned and swigged down the rest of the coffee. "Okay," he said aloud, "back to work." He deleted the lines of M's on his screen and read back to see what he'd been typing before he had nodded off. Dwayne really hated his job. If he could have done something else, he would have, but he couldn't live on the wages he'd make at a fast food joint. He'd been lucky to be taken in by Bug Be Gone, as Duncan kept reminding him. Dwayne had been lucky to land the job, and he shouldn't complain about it. The stupid truck was bad enough. Eye-catching was what management called it. Dwayne felt like an idiot every time he drove it. Everyone looked and pointed as he drove down the street. The brilliant orange half-ton was eye-catching enough. What really clinched it was the huge dead cockroach lying on its back on top of the cab. Dwayne's face flushed warm as he looked at it, his clipboard of orders in hand. "What are you waiting for?" Brad needled. "It's not going to get any brighter." He snorted. "Just like you," he guffawed, slapping Dwayne on the back. Dwayne jerked away from Brad, lips tightening. He tried to focus on the truck and to block Brad out of his consciousness. If there were any new scratches or dents on the truck at the end of his shift, that he didn't note on his walk-around sheet at the beginning of the shift, his pay would be docked to cover the repairs. And they never kept track of the dents and scratches on each truck, and rarely actually repaired them. Dwayne was pretty sure the company was paid 10 times over for each ding. They sucked the lifeblood out of their employees, just like a tick. They were vampiring challenged. "I'm just playing with you, Dwayne." He said Dwayne like it was an insult, like the name itself was a symbol of how much he despised his coworker. "I'm just being friendly. Don't you want a friend?" Dwayne shook his head and climbed up into the cab of the truck without bothering with the walk around. "Dwayne, the bathtub! He's drowning!" Brad mocked. "What a sniveling wuss you are, Dwayne. You know that, don't you?" "I'm not a wuss," Dwayne snapped back. His face was a tight mask and his voice shook. It was like prison all over again. All the taunting, all the stupid macho positioning. Guys like Brad trying to assert themselves as the alpha male, humiliating the smaller, less violent cons like Dwayne. Short in stature and too skinny, Dwayne had struggled to keep his head above water. He'd constantly been pushed to the bottom, pushed by the guards, stomped on by the cons, and worst of all, walked all over by Menendez, the cellmate he could not escape. "Don't cry, Dwayne!" Dwayne heard the bark of laughter from one of the other exterminators. He struggled to keep his face impassive, to pretend he hadn't heard. He was a rock. Nothing could move him. Dwayne didn't need Brad's approval. Dwayne pulled the truck door shut with a slam and looked at the first address on the clipboard. He pretended he couldn't hear the falsetto Brad adopted as he continued to mock Dwayne before his audience. All right, so that's from In the Tick of Time. If you would like to purchase that, there's a link at the bottom. And take a look at my blog, see what else might interest you. All right, talk to you next week.